Hey guys, my name is Anthony, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about just how to calibrate your wheel settings and your force feedback settings. I'm probably going to have something along the screen that shows you. I got a comment basically asking if I can help them out with their wheel settings and with their force feedback settings. So basically what we're going to be talking about, we're not going to be talking about this page here because this is just your wheel button set out layout. You know, this is honestly up to you. This is personal preference. The two pages we're going to be talking about today is this page and this page. And as you can see with the force feedback settings, these are the force feedback settings I use. I did make a video a while ago, but you can basically use this as an updated sort of force feedback settings. And what I'm going to be doing is this video is going to be a more in-depth video. And then I am going to make another video when F1 2020 comes out. However, because the settings, the way you calibrate your wheel settings and the way you calibrate your force feedback settings, because it's going to be the exact same in F1 2020, I thought I'd make the video now, make it as in-depth as I possibly can, and then in F1 2020 I'll show you the sort of settings that I'm using, which, to be honest with you, is most likely going to be the exact same settings on F1 2020 as you're seeing right now in this video anyway. So getting straight into the video now, first we're going to go through the calibration side and then we're going to go through the force feedback side. So I'll probably have a link, timestamp in either the description or the comment section if you want to just check out the force feedback ones. So, you know, you can go down there and basically skip to when I reach there. So quickly getting into it, steering dead zone. What exactly is steering dead zone? It's as simple as it sounds, actually. Basically what it is it's asking you if you want to put a dead zone on your steering input. And a dead zone is a zone where you're turning the wheel and the wheel doesn't activate. Now, personally, I wouldn't recommend putting a dead zone on your steering input for really any reason. The only reason I can really think of is, you know, if there's maybe something going on with your wheel where, for example, you've got the wheel completely straight, and yet the wheel is sort of still inputting that your wheel's turning. Maybe you can put a dead zone on it or something like that. But other than that, honestly, I wouldn't recommend putting a dead zone on your wheel. But just to show you what the dead zone actually does, you can see here, I'm going to probably zoom in post-edit so you can see the steering input, the throttle input, and the brake input. Basically what those do is they show you what your input is so that you can see exactly what these settings do. So the steering dead zone, as you can see, when I have my wheel completely straight, it's at 0. If I tilt it to the left slightly, you can slowly see the number start to increase in the minus. And then if I tilt it to the right, you can see it slowly turn to the positive. So what the dead zone is basically it tells the game, okay, the wheel can turn a certain amount of degrees before you register an input. So if I was to put the dead zone at, say, 15, I can then turn the wheel any side, so either left or right, about 15 degrees before it starts to register that I've turned the wheel. Obviously, I know you guys can't see it right now because I can't do face cams. But basically, if you go into the game and try it out yourself, you'll see if you put the steering dead zone at any number, it will allow you to turn the wheel a certain amount of degrees before the game registers that you've turned the wheel. So for example, if I was to do something completely crazy and put my steering dead zone to 100, that means I can completely, now I'm hoping that you guys can hear this, but I can completely turn my wheel 100 degrees before it registers that I've turned my wheel. So as soon as I reach 100, it will literally go from 0 to 100. So essentially, you don't really want to have a dead zone at all when it comes to the steering input, because you want the force feedback, you want the wheel to be translating as much detail through the wheel into your hands as possible. Moving on now to steering linearity. What that does is it's when you've got the wheel centered, as you start to turn the wheel, the more you turn the wheel, the quicker the game would register the steering input. So right now, obviously I've got it at 0, the basic, that's basically what I have all my settings on. I have it at completely default. So as I turn the wheel, it will turn just as much as I'm turning it. But if I was to put the steering linearity, once again, if I was to do something crazy and put it straight to 100, what will happen is, as I start to turn the wheel, at first, it will input that I'm turning the wheel very slowly, but then all of a sudden it will speed up until it gets to 100. And it will do that on both sides. So basically, the further away from the center position you are, the quicker the game registers that you're turning the wheel. Again, this is something you don't want to have on the wheel for any reason, really. You really don't want to mess with any of the steering stuff, to be honest with you, because it can really mess up the way that the wheel feels. And I think that the way the wheel feels, not necessarily on F1 2019, but just the wheel itself in general, I feel as if they've done a great job with being able to translate all of the feedback that you should be feeling from the car and from the road and stuff like that. So moving on to saturation, basically it's just the opposite of linearity. The closer you are to the center, the quicker it registers an input. So basically, the more you turn the wheel, the less the game will register that you're turning the wheel. I know it sounds quite confusing, but that's basically the best way to explain it. So once again, you don't really want to mess with any of those. It's more when you get to the throttle and brake settings that you sort of want to start messing around with them depending on your liking. So now that we've sort of covered what dead zone, linearity and saturation is, you can then apply it to the throttle and brake, and it's pretty much the same thing. The dead zone is, right now, if I was to press on my pedal, on my throttle pedal, you can see it works just fine. The more I press, the more it goes up. If I was to put a dead zone, say to 25, I can then press my throttle pedal 25 degrees before it starts registering an input. So with the throttle dead zone, the main tips I can give you for this one is you want to put a throttle dead zone on if you're a type of person where you like to rest your foot on the throttle. So say for example, your natural seating position when you're sitting in your cockpit, or if you don't have a cockpit, you have a chair and you've got a desk mount. When you're sitting in your natural position ready to drive on the game, if you see that there's a number appearing on the throttle because you're resting your foot on the throttle, then whatever number you see on the throttle, add that amount of dead zone to your throttle. And basically what that will do is, for example, say for example you're braking and then you've still got your foot resting on your throttle. Obviously that's going to make the car go, and that could end up messing with the car physics depending on what sort of game you're playing, whether it's F1 2019, whether it's Assetto Corsa, whether it's Project Cars. It can mess with the flow of the car because you're braking and accelerating at the same time. So what you're going to want to do is, say I'm resting my foot on the throttle and it's at 11%. You simply just want to add 11% dead zone so that okay, I can rest my foot on the throttle without having to worry about there being a throttle input. So now I can rest my foot there knowing that nothing's going to happen as long as I keep my foot within the 11 degree sort of range. And then after that, I can simply just press down on the throttle and it will work just as normal. The only difference is I'm able to rest my foot on the throttle. And it's pretty similar with the brake dead zone as well. If you tend to rest your foot on the brake, if you have a load cell brake, I personally don't have a load cell brake, I just have the regular T3PA pedals from Thrustmaster. But if you tend to rest your foot on the brake, you just simply want to add a dead zone with the exact number that you see on the screen, so that basically you're not constantly braking. So say for example you're driving the car and you're going through a DRS zone. If your foot is resting on the brake pedal and you've not got a brake dead zone, then you're not going to be able to activate DRS and you're slowing down the car as well, and that's just going to cause a bunch of issues when you're racing. So you're just going to want to add that dead zone just to make sure that, okay, you can rest your foot in a natural, comfortable position, and then you could just use the brake as regular after that as well, so you don't have to worry about all of that. Linearity, we've already covered that. Basically, the more that I press down on the throttle and the brake, the quicker it will activate. It's a lot more apparent in the throttle and brake than it is in the steering input. So for example, if I was to put the linearity to 50 on the throttle, you can see that as I quickly put more pressure on the throttle, it quickly gets closer and closer to 100. And in fact, you'll see here, that, if you give me a second, if I put it up to 75 specifically, you can see that my throttle actually gets to 100% input before, obviously you can't see my feet right now, but before my foot reaches the end of the travel for my throttle pedal. And that's because the closer you are to the end of your travel, the quicker it inputs in the game. So if you're somebody who you know, you have a broken pedal for some reason, if maybe your pedal's not registering the way it should be, maybe, you know, putting a throttle linearity or a brake linearity on there would be a good option for you. It could really help fix the issue that's going on with whatever the problem is with your throttle and your brake. So for example, if you're pressing down on your throttle and it's not registering as quickly as it should be, maybe you can, you know, tinker around with the settings. Maybe if you put it to 25, you know, it should help really with activating the throttle a little bit more. I've noticed that on the controller specifically, some people, if they've had the controller for a long time, basically what happens is they can press down on their accelerator, on the RT button, and it wouldn't fully register 100% even though they've got the trigger down to the bottom. So having a throttle linearity could really fix that problem, because it will allow the game to input 100% throttle application before you've reached the end of your travel on the controller. So that's one situation where you're really going to want to use either throttle or brake linearity. Moving on to the saturation now. This personally is a good... Okay, it's a decent way to sort of learn how to drive without traction control. Basically what this does is, especially for the throttle saturation, is it doesn't activate as quickly. So when I press on the throttle, sometimes if you're not using traction control, you can end up putting too much throttle on the rear tires, and you end up causing wheel spin. However, if you were to put the saturation to say maybe 15, you know, you can really press on that throttle a little bit more without having to sort of worry about causing the car to spin out as much. It is essentially just another version of traction control if you really think about it in a basic sense. So, you know, I could literally use this if I wanted to sort of gradually learn how to not use traction control. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it is an option if you want to. And again, for the brake saturation, it's basically the same thing. You know, I can press on the brake a little bit more, and I won't see as much braking force. I won't see as much braking pressure on the car until I sort of get towards the end. So that's something that you can really sort of think about if you're learning to drive without traction control. Again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it is an option if you desperately need it, or once again, if there's something wrong with either your triggers on the controller or your pedals, if you're using a wheel. So that's basically what the saturation, the linearity, and the dead zone do for your steering input, the throttle input, and your brake input. So now moving on to your force feedback settings now. Again, force feedback settings is something that's going to be personal to you, but you can obviously use somebody else's as a sort of baseline, and then you can sort of tinker around with it to sort of get what you like out of the wheel that you're using, whether it's a Thrustmaster, whether it's a Fanatec, or whether it's like a Logitech or something like that. I know that obviously the different wheels that you have will warrant different strengths and stuff like that. So just to give you guys context, I use the Thrustmaster TX wheelbase with a Thrustmaster TM Openwheel add-on, and obviously these are my current force feedback settings for that. So for the vibration and force feedback setting, you're obviously going to want that on. If you don't want force feedback, then obviously you could turn it off, but I don't really see the point in not having force feedback, because having a wheel without force feedback is basic. I mean, it's even worse than driving with a controller, because technically a controller has force feedback in it. So, you know, you generally want to have that on. For your vibration and force feedback strength, again, it's personal preference for you. I'm pretty sure the F1 games default it at 100, but I know 100 is a little bit too strong for some people. I used to use 105 for most of this game. It's only recently that I've turned it down to 95, and I will get into why I turned it down a little bit later when we actually get into the wheel damper part of this. So yeah, I turned it down a little bit from 105 to 95, and for me, this feels pretty nice. Basically, I want the wheel to be strong enough so that when I'm turning the wheel, it actually, there is a decent amount of force fighting me, basically. And I know some people don't necessarily like that. So if you don't like that, I've heard some people use over 120. I've heard people use, 60. It really is personal preference. I would recommend just sort of tinkering around with it. I'd say a good baseline is anywhere from maybe 70 to 110, or if you want a more specific baseline, anywhere from maybe 80 to 90 is a pretty good force feedback strength for the Thrustmaster TX. For Logitech and Fanatec, I personally have never used those, so I can't really give you guys recommendations, but I'd say probably roughly the same if you're using those type of wheels as well. And again, you can just tinker them to see what suits you. On-track effects. Now, usually people would probably have this a lot higher, but the main reason I have this quite low is because I make YouTube videos. So, you don't really want to hear the wheelbase and the wheel sort of, I can't even think of a good descriptive word for it, but basically making a bunch of noise. You don't really want to hear that when I'm sort of making live com videos. So that's why I sort of have mine a little bit down. But if you want to feel quite a lot of feedback through the wheel as you're driving on the road, you probably want to put those up, maybe 30 or 40 is a good sort of number to have those at if you're not going to be recording and making YouTube videos. Rumble strips, basically it is as simple as it says. It basically translates the force through the wheel into your hands when you're going over a rumble strip, which, as you can see right now in an F2 car, I'm doing that right now. So if I was actually driving right now, basically I'd be feeling all the forces from the wheel, basically not telling me that I'm going over a rumble strip. Usually I tend to have that higher than anything else, because if you're driving, you're sort of concentrating and you're sort of in the zone, you're not concentrating on anything else. You might end up basically having tunnel vision. So if you have the force feedback of the rumble strip greater than you have on the on-track road, then basically as soon as you ride over a rumble strip, you'll sort of know, okay, you're sort of getting towards the limits of the track. So that's basically why I tend to have the rumble strip a little bit higher than anything else. And the off-track effect is basically the on-track effect, but for when you're going over gravel or grass and stuff like that. I tend to have it just slightly higher than the on-track effect. That's just me personally. Again, you guys can tinker with these and see what suits you. I'd recommend, honestly, for most people, you guys are not really going to be making YouTube videos, so you can have these quite a little bit higher so you can feel what's going on with your car a little bit more. Again, I tend to have mine a little bit lower so that you guys can't really hear it through the mic when I'm making YouTube videos. Getting into this setting now, the wheel damper. As I said, I actually turned down my force feedback strength settings mainly because of this. I thought when I had this at 105, I had this at 0. And I was going through the settings and I seen, okay, well this is the strength of the tire force on the racing wheel. Basically, it makes the racing wheel feel heavier in a sense. So what I did is I decided to turn down from the wheel from 105 to 95 and then boost the wheel dampering up to 10. And for me personally, it felt really nice. It's a nice medium. For most people, you might not feel the difference, but for me personally, I felt a difference. So that's why I use it. But for some people, they might not feel the difference. If you're in that case, then honestly just leave it at 0. I think the default is 5. For most people you're really not going to feel the difference, but for me personally I did, so that's why I have it like that, and that's why I turned this down. And for me it feels nice. Understeer enhance. Some people turn this off, and I'm a little bit confused as to why they do that. Basically what this setting does is it basically enhances the feeling of your wheel when you're going through understeer. the best way to describe it is, as you're turning the car, it's going to feel nice and heavy, but as soon as you start to experience understeer, it's going to go from feeling quite heavy to feeling super light. So that basically signifies to you, okay, I'm getting understeer, and you can then adjust your steering input accordingly. I don't know why people turn it off. I guess it's just personal preference. For me, I have it on so that I can know when I'm sort of causing the car to understeer. That's simply just it, really. So when it comes to the maximum wheel rotation, people have this at a whole bunch of different settings. For me personally, I literally keep it at the default. The way I see it is, I want to see my character turn the wheel exactly the same way that I'm turning the wheel. So that's why I keep it at 360. If you want to change it, then obviously you can change it. That's completely up to you. So that's pretty much it for when it comes to calibrating your throttle, your brake, your steering, and your force feedback settings. So if you like this video and you want to see more F1 2020 content when the game comes out in less than a month, then hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll be posting league races, I'll be posting live streams of those league races, I'll be posting challenges, and I'll be also posting a lot more tutorials like this so that you guys can get the best settings that you need for the game. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.